I'm joined today by the third entry for one of the four contenders for the GBGB vacant owners role. Alun Williams has written to the Star in the past written to our letters page with some views that he'd like to get across. He's now put himself forward for this role. Welcome, Alun. First thing I'd like to ask is, can you give us a little bit of your greyhound background? Where do you come from and what you're interested in?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much indeed for the invite today. So in terms of my background, many generations of greyhound owners previously, right back to in the 50s and the 60s. I had great uncle who had dogs at White City, a granddad who had a couple of dogs up in Chester, and also ran them at Winsford as well. And of course, right down to present day, my parents are both registered owners, my partner's a registered owner, and I'm an owner, and I've currently got my dogs with Bob and Maureen Patterson at Central Park. I've got two retired greyhounds at home, and I've also got a greyhound in training at the moment, Isabella, who's currently running at the moment. I appreciate that puts me at the far end of the scale in terms of the sort of the small owners, as it were, the single owner position. But I think here there's a real scope for a kind of a new voice and a new set of opinions. I think that I think the owner practitioner director role is essentially a sounding board for those views and that level of feedback. As you say, I've already written into the Greyhound Star in the past in response to the Billy Boyle article, which I thought was excellent. And also I've a regular correspondent with the Central Park Racing office as well. And apologies in advance to them for any correspondence they've had from me in the past, exploring the vagaries of the grading system there.
Okay, now having read through your submission, one of the things that struck out very early was you're desperately keen to increase communication and information for owners. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, delighted to. So I think fundamentally, my approach to life has always been anyone you meet, anyone you're talking to wants you to find something interesting about them for a couple of minutes a day. You run a website. Ultimately, that is essentially your views on greyhound racing made public, and actually then how do people interact with them. And that could be the same with anyone having just a basic conversation about owning a greyhound, or the sort of their general views on the sport. When I got into greyhound racing, registered the dog, fantastic experience with Bob and Maureen, full transparency, working with Brian as well at the trust. So how do I get involved? How what's the sort of visual process? How to buy a dog? And then nothing. Not fantastic communications from Bob and Maureen, but absolutely nothing from the greyhound board. Nothing that sort of said, thank you for coming to join us. Brilliant, you're a new owner. What do you want from us? Why are you even here? And I think as well, when I've read things like Billy Boyle's article, I think fundamentally there is a discrepancy between the amount that an owner is putting into the sport and the feedback they're getting back. There's absolutely very little at the moment. No one just sort of says, thank you for being an owner. And no one then turns around and says to an owner, well, what do you want the sport to look like in 5 years' time? What do you love about it? Okay, if there are things you don't particularly like about it, how can we work with you to improve it? You look at the recent article I've sent in as well, and it'll be in my manifesto. There's fantastic innovation amongst greyhound owners. Think about Greyhound Trader. That's a brilliant idea. It's fundamentally very simple. Ultimately, it's about making the purchase of a greyhound available online. But that just didn't exist beforehand. It was very sort of, it felt like you had to take a phenomenal risk in approaching someone you probably didn't even know in order to buy a greyhound if you were new to the sector. But actually, with Greyhound Trader, you can go online, you can have a look, they can ultimately think, pitch where you want to spend your money, etc., etc. My fundamental view of greyhound ownership is you should be able to do the entirety of the experience through your phone. Everything, purchasing the greyhound, to tracking its progress, to watching it, to streaming it, to checking in on its welfare, to seeing where it pitches against other greyhounds of the same ability, and then ultimately, through to retirement, and then ultimately how it comes to you safe for a comfortable existence the rest of its life. At the moment, I don't think we're quite there. And I'm a bit worried that we're designing an owner experience without asking an owner. I can't remember the last time anyone actually asked me and said, well, what do you want this to look like? What do you want this experience to look like? The owner practitioner director role for me is that opportunity to set that up. It's got to be a listening exercise in the first instance. Anyone who comes into this role, and if I'm fortunate enough to garner enough votes to be successful in my nomination, has to see the first stage of this as a listening exercise. You've got to get out, speak to people and say, what does it mean to you to be an owner? What do you enjoy about it? What do you want the sport to look like in the next few years? And how can we enhance the owner's experience for you? That's got to be your first point. Cool. Got to be able to corral it around a simple idea. Then you move into the development stage. That might take a couple of years. And then ultimately it's proof positive after that. Actually, what have you delivered? And how has that experience been enhanced? And then you get that feedback loop again. How has that gone? How has it improved? What can be improved? And then it becomes an iterative process. But you only achieve that from the centre. You've got to be in there. The owner's voice has to be heard at board level in order for you to be able to advance that sort of change. And I think, from my background as a head of comms in a variety of government roles, that I've got that stakeholder engagement experience. I've got that drive. I've also got that willingness to write a letter and engage and be active to really give this role what it needs. And essentially, in my manifesto, I make that commitment to the owners that essentially put me in there, and I'll be able to sort of take our message forward by listening in the first instance.
Okay, can you give me some examples of the kind of thing that you're talking about? Because I know that there were some in your submission. If you were the suggestions of the kind of thing we should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, we should. So one of the things I've made a suggestion of, just as one particular example in my manifesto, is that we should corral our owners to lobby the core broadcaster to make sure the Derby result is carried within the next 3 years. It is totally farcical that our flagship event that we do better than anywhere else in the world, that has gone from strength to strength and is an absolutely brilliant event, is not covered by the BBC. But there is baseball. I mean, that's nonsense, isn't it? That's a genuine nonsense. So, and the owners are, they are a multitude, right? That is there's several voices who will be able to say, okay, well, I can bring influence elsewhere to bear. And then you make sure the owners are represented in that result, right? So someone says, okay, this is what I am as an owner. Because what ultimately will happen then is that someone will see that result online, see an owner's quote and the excitement they've generated and the value they had from winning, etc., and think, I fancy that. I could do that. And how do I do it? And then, of course, because you've done the work that I've already outlined there about enhancing the new owner experience at the beginning, bringing that digital experience in, bringing it all into a single place, then actually got that bringing in new owners who will then bring in new standards, new expectations, new suggestions for the sport. And that will also, of course, then bring the experience for the current owners in, who, of course, got experience and have been around and seen what they've enjoyed and what they don't. And then ultimately, of course, then, the broad ownership experience improves for everybody.
Yeah, but what does it look like? I mean, what would you be expecting to see as an owner? You get voted in 3 years down the line. How different does it look as an owner to what it is now?
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate question, right? So at the moment, there are no localized fora for owners based around the tracks, right? There's nothing at all. So I would suggest that, driven by the GBGB, driven by the person who owns this role, there are a localized communication fora by which owners can get together and say, these are our issues of the day. These are the things I'm fixing. So ultimately, within a couple of years, you would look to set those up. You could pilot them around certain tracks, and then ultimately you want to make sure that it's elsewhere. It's been rolled out. Then what you want to be able to say within a couple of years, I think, is be able to say, well, okay, look, at the moment, the owners portal on the GB website just doesn't do anything. I know that there are plans afoot to improve it, but no one's asked any of us what we might want out of that portal. It can't simply be just, tell us what the results are. Actually, it should say, my dog in numbers. My dog's year to date, how's it gone? Ultimately, how's it rank against its peers? And ultimately, where it might go in the future. Are we starting to look at retirement, etc., etc.? But also, it could also be a potential portal where we have some of the more complicated conversations. Is there new legislation coming that could be a threat to the future of the sport? The people in this sector, the owners, the trainers, you name it, customer base, are more than capable of engaging on points of legislation, complicated subject matter. But at the moment, there's nothing that flags anything coming down the line. There's nothing that actually gets us to coalesce around a single position, so, and we can do that, right? We can have an owners forum where we actually say, okay, this is the major issues of the year. What do we think about it? How are we sort of orchestrate a lobbying effort? Who do we need to speak to? Has anyone got any contacts? Where are our friends? Have that sort of thing. And, again, that doesn't exist at the moment. Within the first couple of years, I think that's something that we set up. I think ultimately, within the first couple of years as well, you would actually be saying, how does the entirety of the owner experience find its way via a smartphone, right? Every single stage of the game. How do I buy them? How do I approach a trainer to take that dog on, right? How do I watch that dog if I can't get off at 7 minutes past 11 on a Monday? Which if you're bringing in new owners, that's a legitimate question, isn't it? They're not really, if they're working 9 to 5, they're not going to be there, but they can still watch clips of that, share those clips with other people to generate more interest. And I think at the moment we've got all those resources, but they're disparately located. And actually, I think the owner practitioner goes out to the owners and says, what do we want as a sort of resource base? What do we want to be available to us? How can the GBG be helped to flag that up, bring it together, and then put it into a package for new owners, current owners? And then, of course, actually people who are lapsed owners as well. Why have people left the sport? No one's asking the question of people, why have left the sport? We must have the contact details for these people. What process are we going to bring them back? And I think also the owner practitioner has that role as well, where she say, okay, you've been an owner for several decades, you've chosen not to be one any longer. Why? And what can we learn from you? And then ultimately, can we bring you back? And if we can't, okay, but can we still use you as an advocate for our sport?
Yeah, it occurs to me, for example, it was David Mitchell, who was the person who really pushed for the online trial sessions, which I think made him very popular with Entain at the time. And he first introduced those sessions, but that was an owner-led thing. There was certainly nothing from the Greyhound board that was pushing that. Do you feel, and I've asked a couple of people this, do you feel, in view of Paul Carpenter's departure, that owners are taken seriously within the board?
So I think there's a couple of points here. So I go back to the point I made at the beginning. You only win from the centre. You can only make real change by being in there and doing it. So at the moment, there's not enough representation of the owners on the board, right? If you look at even the committee, the subcommittee structure that sits underneath the board, there's no owner committee, right? So at the moment, it is fairly clear, I think, that the owner, there's a point here, isn't there? There's to be and to be seen to be influential on this. So actually, even if the owner feedback is making its way up, the way that the board is currently structured, prior to someone being appointed to this role, suggests that it isn't. So it's actually, we need to be seen to be represented as well. So there must be an owner representative on there of some kind. I don't really want to get into the discussion around the balance. And the reason for that is society itself is not ready to have a deep and meaningful conversation about the role of gambling, where it be in loot boxes for children, or, general sort of, prevalence of gambling on adverts, etc., etc. So there's not, for me, too much importance to be attached here to talk about sort of how many industry practitioners there are on board, etc. Fundamentally, it's about getting in there first, building relationships, having your first few successes, working out who you can probably bring on side, and then also bringing people with you by virtue of those successes, by being transparent, by being willing to advance the case of other owners. So my view here is that Paul will have had his legitimate reasons for leaving the board. Now, I saw his letters afterwards. I thought they're absolutely fair. My view is anyone who takes this role needs to see it as a multi-year project. You are not going to achieve everything you want that first board meeting in May or wherever it is. You're going to have to get in there. You're going to have to do a lot of the hard work behind the scenes, and you're also going to have to understand this is going to take time and it's going to be quite attritional. but actually that will manifest itself over time. You know, you get in there, you start bringing your allies in, and then you achieve it by being there and set up. You've got to be in there first.
Do you think that there is the will? Do you think that there is a genuine desire to see greater owner representation and authority within the industry?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I absolutely do. I think when you look at the moment about a lot of the initiatives that are taking place here, so we talk about ground trader, which I think is excellent, but you also things like Greyhound Stats. Like fundamentally, that is entirely driven by an individual who finds it, you know, important to drive the data aspect behind ground racing. So even if you could sort of say, okay, well, there's some debate about whether the governing bodies or the structures that sit around ground racing that might not have the owners in mind, but actually, for those of us who have, you know, interest in the sector, that there are ample opportunities. We can be innovative. We can drive it ourselves. We, as I mentioned in a piece of correspondence to you previously, it's not about being passive here. If we are apathetic to the challenges around ground racing, that's our biggest danger. Actually, to be honest, if we drive our own enthusiasm here, and I actually say, no, I can make that change whether I'm on the board or a voice that sort of regularly writes in or, you know, is prominent in various owner circles, you know, that appetite is generated from within there. We don't need it to be driven by the Greyhound board necessarily. It's a very useful tool, and it's utterly vital that we are in the room, particularly at governance level, but it's not the only one. And particularly in the digital age, that's why I've been driving this position around the phone stuff, right? Is that fundamentally, Greyhound racing is absolutely perfect for the digital age. You know, it's a race that unfolds in a short period of time, right? That's easily clipped and shared. The draw itself for a major race, you know, that is absolutely basic, isn't it? You just take a video clip and stream it. You could have subscription models for days for Greyhound racing, whether you've got to sort of, I don't know, for the trials outside the main outside sort of the main course of the programs during the day. I think about my own. I've got an 11-month-old daughter who goes to nursery, so we have something called Tapestry, right, where during the day, then we get photos from how she got on nursery, so when we're at work. Now, you know, for example, couldn't you have an owner-led initiative that suggested, okay, for potentially more digitally savvy, the trainers or whatever, how perhaps you could have clips of the training, for example, right? So the owner is constantly appraised of progress of the dog, which is fine, etc., right? And it's that kind of thing. I think is just saying to our owners, we know you're there. We appreciate what you're giving us, and you know, while we're not going to make all your changes up front, it's impossible. It takes time. At least tell us what you want, right? And tell us what you like about the sport, what you love about it. There's been a real change in tone, I think, in terms of how Greyhound racing perceived itself recently, and I know I'm slightly going on at this point, but you know, we've had that existential crisis of the pandemic where we're not even sure if we'll survive in any shape or form. And then we're worried about, you know, reviews and, you know, external factors. But actually, we're in a state of growth. We've got more tracks. We've got, you know, better prize money. We've got new people coming into the sport. We've got new innovative ideas. We should be celebrating. We have a workforce that employs people from teenagers right into their 80s. That's fantastic. We have tracks that are all around the country. They're not just sort of southeast focused, you know. So it's absolutely why we do the sport better than anyone else in the world. And I think what we're saying to our owners here is, this is what's great about the sport. You probably, you know this already, but let's remind you. And here's a package of positive content that you can then take out and talk to other people and say, I'm an owner. Do you fancy it? And these are the reasons why. And I don't think that package exists yet. And I think the owner practitioner director plays a role in bringing those ideas together, bundling them up, getting us to write down some simple ideas, and then giving new owners and current owners the kind of the energy and the support that they need to go out and sort of spread the good news, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to give everybody roughly the same kind of time on this thing, so I wanted to round it up. One thing that I noticed was that you were quite keen to say, win, lose or draw for anybody that's taking part, you'd hope they would all continue to play their part, as I'm sure you will. Would that be correct?
That's absolutely right. I mean, look, I mean, fundamentally, this role is about improving the experience and the representation for owners. So ultimately, if I'm fortunate enough to garner enough votes from the other owners to be successful here, I'd be utterly delighted, total privilege to be able to do so. And I look forward to getting out to people. However, we've got 3 other totally legitimate candidates, you know, fantastic in their own right. The interviews I've seen so far have been brilliant. I've no doubt Kevin's will be as well. But we're all prepared to take this on. So if someone is successful, brilliant, we should congratulate them. We should really give them some time. You know, time is utterly key. We've got to give them some patience as well. And actually, for those of us who are prepared to put our head above the parapet, we've also got to be able to say, we're still here, you know, bounce some ideas off us. Even if it's a call once a month where we all get together for half an hour and just sort of, you know, say, well, you know, these are my views. And then the owner practice director takes them forward. That's the sort of the genesis of the idea, right? And then the sort of the broader network improves from there. I think for me, I'm in a privileged position and in a realistic position. People have no idea who I am, none whatsoever. So what I would say to people who are thinking about voting for me is that means I'm ready to listen to you. I'm ready to hear what you have to say. I'm ready to sort of take your views and present them to the board with no preconceptions about, you know, what my overall views might be, and sort of history might be of it. And ultimately, after that, judge me on my outcomes, judge me on my results. Give me some time to do it, but I'll deliver. That's
brilliant. Alan, thank you very much for joining me. As you say, one more to go, and best of luck for the vote.
Thank you ever so much. That's very kind of you. Thank you very much indeed for the invite.